Isang magandang araw sa inyo lahat. Para sa lesson na ito, pag-uusapan natin ang mga topics tungkol sa chemical kinetics, specifically tungkol ito sa collision theory, factors affecting the rate of chemical reaction, and catalyst. Our competency is to use collision theory to explain the effects of concentration, temperature, and particle size on the rate of reaction. Also, define catalyst and describe how it affects the rate of reaction. Specific objectives natin ay ang mga sumusunod. Describe collision theory, enumerate the types of chemical reaction, and describe the different factors that affect the rate of chemical reaction. So tayo ay nandito na sa bahaging ito para sa quarter 1 ng ating physical science. So in the previous lesson, napag-usapan natin ang biological macromolecules or biomolecules. At ano-ano nga ulit ito? These are organic large molecules found in living organisms. So pag sinabi nating organic, they are composed of carbon or carbon-based sila. So ano itong mga biological macromolecules na ito? These are the carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, and nucleic acid. So the components of the biological molecules, yung basic nila is the carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, or the CHO. For proteins, meron na siyang nitrogen. And in some cases, meron pa siyang sulfur. And for nucleic acid, yung bumubuo ng genetic material, meron siyang carbohydrates, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and phosphorus. These biological macromolecules perform various functions from protection, structure, sources of energy, and a lot more. So for this lesson, let us start with recalling the difference between physical and chemical change. So meron ako ditong mga scenario or situation, perhaps. Sabihin lang kung ito ay physical or chemical change. Number 1, baking a cake. It is chemical change. Burning of a paper. Chemical change. Brewing a hot coffee. Physical change. Dissolving salt in water. That's also physical change. And mixing paint to make a new color. Chemical change. So, ano yung pagkakaiba ng physical change sa chemical change? So, when we say physical change, it occurs when objects or substances undergo a change that does not change their chemical composition. So, kung babalikan natin yung items kanina, yung physical change doon is brewing of coffee and dissolving salt in water. So, after ng reaction, wala namang nagbago, yung salt ay salt pa din at yung lasa ay kape pa din. So, chemical change on the other hand happens when a substance combines with another to form a new substance. So, dito nababago na yung composition, yung property and characteristics ng substances. So, that's chemical change. So, this is also part of the review, pero this will be touched in this lesson. So, ano-ano yung type of chemical reaction ng bawat reaction na nakikita ninyo. So, wag mo na sasakit ang ulo. Familiar na kayo dyan because during the junior high school, may mga touches na kayo about chemical equation. And these things are representing different chemical reactions. So, meron tayong 4 na chemical reactions: combination, decomposition, single displacement, and double displacement. So, what you're going to do is that you'll identify kung anong uri ng chemical reaction itong 5 items na meron tayo. So, let's start with number 1. So, you have hydrogen gas and oxygen gas forming water. So, that's combination. So, yung second item, sodium hydroxide and iron 3 chloride or ferric chloride forming sodium chloride and ferric hydroxide. This is double displacement. How about number 3? So we have potassium chlorate, and after the reaction you have potassium chloride and oxygen gas. So that's decomposition. Number 4 is potassium and water forming potassium hydroxide and hydrogen gas. That's letter C, single displacement. And lastly, we have ammonia and sulfuric acid ba to, if I'm not mistaken, and it forms ammonium sulfate, kung tama ba ako. I'll check. So yes, ammonium sulfate nga. So ano yung number 5 na yan? So that's not double displacement, that's actually combination, ano? Okay, before we discuss collision theory, babalikan ko lang itong mga chemical reaction na ito. This, sabi ko nga kanina, this will be discussed sa content ng lesson, pero para lang kumbaga ma-rekindle sa atin yung concept. Pag sinabi natin combination, combine. Nagsasama yung dalawang substances to form a new substance. So, ang naging example nga natin doon is yung number 1. So, meron kayong hydrogen and oxygen forming water. Combination is also known as synthesis. So, pagsasama. Pag sinabi naman nating decomposition, paghihiwalay. So, sa 5 items na yan, ang example natin is number 3, potassium chlorate. So, isang buong molecule. Then, after the reaction, naghiwalay into 2 substances. And yung letter C naman, ang example natin dyan is number 4, single replacement. Kung mapapansin ninyo, yung water ay pinaltan, yung isang hydrogen ay pinaltan ng potassium at nahiwala yung hydrogen on the other part of the equation. And kung titignan din natin yung yung number 5, tricky ito kasi parang malaki or malalaking molecules or madaming elements yung involved, pero pagdating dito, isa lang yung nabuo. So, this is also combination. So, nagsama lang sila. So, tricky lang siya, kaya siya parang appeared to be C or D kasi malaki siya, pero technically, that's A. And lastly, letter D item natin na sagot is number 2. Meron kayong dalawang substances sa reactant at meron kayong nabuo or kumbaga nagpalitan sila ng partner pagdating sa product. So, sana naalala nyo pa tong concept na ito. And of course, the parts of the chemical reaction. So, you have this side o yung nasa kaliwa, lahat ng nasa kaliwa, whether isang buong molecule or dalawang molecule, ang term na ginagamit natin to describe kung ano yung nasa kaliwa is the reactant at yung nasa kanan naman ay ang product. Yung arrow sa gitna separates the two, and ang basa din dito ay yield. So, parang result of or after the reaction or as a reaction. So, yun yung ibig sabihin niya. So, let's talk about collision theory. So, anong sinasabi dito sa collision theory? So, particles comprise all substances. So, yung mga substances that we have um, in the universe or on Earth ay binubuo ng mga particles. So, ano itong mga particles na ito? It can be an atom, a single atom, or diatomic. Pag sinabi nating diatomic, dalawang magkaparehong element na magkasama. O pwede rin namang ang particles or substance ay in a form of a compound or a molecule. Ano pa? These particles are constantly colliding with each other. So, these particles are not stationary, which means they are moving. And when they are moving, they have the tendency to collide or to bump with other substances or particles. So, the collision of particles result to a generation of product. So, yung reactant, when they collide and successfully may mga condition at na-satisfy nila yung mga condition na yun, they will form product or a product. So, in short, collision theory states that the rate of chemical reaction is proportional to the number of collisions between the reactant particles. Or, reacting substances must come into contact or collide with enough activation energy and in correct orientation so that their electron shells can rearrange to form the products in the reaction. So, parang ganito. So, first, you have the reactant. So, bago maging product, meron munang chemical reaction. So, the condition is that number 1, yung enerhiya ay sapat para ma-overcome nila yung mga bonds or the bonds between the element para mag-rearrange yung mga atom and you have the new product. And the second condition is that they must have the proper orientation. So, if they do not have the proper orientation, the electrons will not be rearranged. If that happens, then you will not have a new product. So, ano yung what if it does not satisfy this condition? So, ganito yung mangyayari. Una, kung hindi sapat ang energy, the reactants after the supposed chemical reaction will remain as the original kasi hindi kinaya or hindi sapat yung energy to break the bonds existing in the substances for the atoms to be rearranged and to form a new substance. Pag naman mali yung orientation, hindi rin magkakaroon ng product. So, a chemical reaction does not take place if the collision between molecules does not have sufficient energy to break the bonds in the reactants and if the molecules are not properly oriented. So, some terms that we need to be familiarized with. Chemical reaction. So, ito yung formation of the substance. So, yung before and after, the whole process is called chemical reaction. Reactants, nabanggit ko na kanina, these are the substance or substances exist before a chemical reaction. Sa equation, ito yung nasa kaliwa. Product, the new substance that are formed during a chemical reaction or after the chemical reaction. Ito naman sa chemical equation, yung nasa kanan. Chemical equation indicates the reactants and the products of a reaction. So, yung mga nakita ninyo dun sa exercise kanina, those are examples of chemical equation. Showing chemical reaction and of the reactants and of the products. So, talking about the conditions for chemical reaction to proceed. So, we have 1, there must be collision. Kasi without the collision, following the collision theory, then walang energy na mag-activate para ma-break yung mga bonds. Because for that to happen, kailangan nila magbanggaan. So, hindi sapat na mag-collide lang sila. So, upon collision, there must be a correct orientation. So, yung arrangement ng molecule or ng compound or ng element, dapat tama siya for, sabi nga kanina, for the electrons surrounding or involved in the bond ay ma-alter or ma-rearrange. Another condition is that the energy to break the bond must be enough kasi pag kulang, hindi siya magpo-proceed with the chemical reaction. So this energy is called activation energy and it is the energy required for the chemical reaction to proceed, thus forming the products in a chemical reaction. So parang ganito yung itsura niya. So kung makikita natin, itong graph na ito shows the process of chemical reaction. So you have the reactants here. Ito naman yung products. Itong curve na ito shows the increasing energy. So dito nagbabanggaan ang mga particles na involved sa chemical reaction or the reactants. If this peak is reached, ibig sabihin, ito yung required energy para ma-form yung product ay na-reach due to the collision of the particles. Then, congratulations, meron kang product. But, if the activation energy is not reached, ibig sabihin, let's say, ito yung collision, then tataas siya, tapos hanggang dito lang siya, then wala kang i-expect na product kasi hindi niya na-reach yung energy activation or activation energy. So, activation energy is the required amount of energy for the chemical reaction to proceed, thus forming the products. Okay. Ang kumbaga in simple term or simple analogy, wait lang. So para siyang tao na nagtutulak ng bato uphill. So pagka sapat ang enerhiya na meron yung tao para itulak yung bato pataas, so yung peak is the amount of energy na kailangan niya, then maipupush niya downward yung bato. But if the amount of energy is not enough, then we cannot expect that this stone or block or adobe will move towards the other side of the hill. So, balikan ulit natin yung different types of chemical reaction. So, ano ulit yung apat na yun? So, we have combination, synthesis. Yan, nag-combine lang sila. Decomposition, one perhaps huge molecule na naghiwalay or pinaghiwalay. Single displacement, may ka-partner siya, pinaltan niya. So, kaya si blue ay nag-iisa na. Double displacement, nagpalitan sila ng partner. So, ang example uli natin dyan, hydrogen gas, oxygen gas, forming water. Potassium chlorate, isang malaking molecule. After the chemical reaction, naghiwalay bilang potassium chloride and oxygen gas. Single displacement, so nagpalitan ng partner. Pinaltan ang isang element. And of course, double displacement, nagpalitan ng partner. Although, hindi ganito lagi yung case kasi may condition kung ano-ano yung mga mapapalitan na elements, but that's not part of this lesson. So, may condition yan. So, let's talk about the factors affecting the rate of reaction. So, the first one is nature and concentration of reactants. So, pag sinabi nating nature, parang it answers the question, anong klasing substance siya. So, pwedeng anong phase of matter siya, anong uri ng substance siya, kumbaga the nature of the substance itself. So, it's a factor since it has its own identity and property. So, yung pagiging siya talks about the identity and the properties of that substance. For example, hydrocarbons. So, meron tayong methane gas, CH4, and we have naphthalene or yung mothballs. So, anong pagkakaiba nila? Methane is a gas and naphthalene or mothball is a solid. So, methane gas is easier to burn than naphthalene. Kasi yung naphthalene, kailangan niya munang ma-vaporize bago siya mag-react with oxygen. Unlike methane gas, bilang gas na siya, easier to burn, meaning madali na siyang magre-react with oxygen. So, that's one example as to nature. Pag sinabi naman nating concentration, it talks about the amount of substance per unit volume or gaano kadaming solute ang nasa solvent. So, that's one idea of how to describe concentration. So, gaano kapuro or gaano ka diluted or ka hindi kapuro yung isang solution. So, higher concentration means there is more solute in a solution. It also means that higher concentration will have higher rate of reaction kasi mas concentrated siya. Mas may particles siya. So, pag mas may particles siya, then the possibility of another substance na mag-collide sa mga particles na ito is higher than sa less concentrated, less particles, less chance of having collision. So, there. So, let's try to have this as an example. So, ano yung effect ng concentration sa isang chemical reaction? So, we have, for example, magnesium ribbon na nilagay sa hydrochloric acid. So, we have magnesium here and hydrochloric acid. So, yan yung reactants. So, it is represented by this picture. So, yung hydrochloric acid and magnesium, definitely magre-react yan to form magnesium chloride and hydrogen gas. So, anong uri ito ng chemical reaction? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Single replacement or displacement. So, now, the big question here, what if the hydrochloric acid ay magkaiba ng concentration? Yung isa, 5 moles. Yung isa, 2. So, mas concentrated yung second sa una. So, alin yung mas mabilis na magpo-produce ng magnesium chloride and hydrogen gas or mas magbubula kagaya nito? So, the bula or the bubbles ay hydrogen gas. So, yan yung indicator na merong chemical reaction. Ano? So, may gas. May bubbles. So, ang sagot dyan is this one. Kasi mas concentrated siya, so mas madaming particles, mas higher ang rate of reaction. Okay. Next. Factor number 2, temperature. Higher temp means higher kinetic energy. Higher kinetic energy means faster movement of particles. At pag mas mabilis ang paggalaw ng mga particles, sina-associate natin to sa mas mataas na kinetic energy. So, please disregard yung first equation. Doon tayo sa second equation. Magnesium will react with water, but it will take time. Now, if you increase the temperature of water and the mixture of the two substances, what will happen is that it will speed up the rate of reaction. So, bibilis yung rate of reaction. Reason to that, yung temperature, pinapataas niya yung paggalaw ng mga particles. So, pag mas mabilis ang paggalaw ng mga particles, mas mabilis ang pag-collide nila sa isa't isa. In this case, pag tinaasan mo ang temperature ng water, bibilis yung mga water molecules, mas magbabump siya or magko-collide siya doon sa magnesium solid. And then you will have the chemical reaction forming magnesium hydroxide and hydrogen gas. Factor number 3, surface area and particle size. So pag sinabi nating surface area, ito yung area ng substance exposed doon sa another substance. So for example, itong image natin, sa first image natin, it has low surface area. Why? Kung titingnan natin itong mga box na ito, representing a substance, for example, merong nasa loob. Kumbaga, naka-hide mula dun sa mga particles na pwedeng mag-collide sa kanya. Unlike, pagkahiwa-hiwalay itong mga substances na ito, all sides are exposed, meaning mas malawak yung surface area as a whole nang hiwa-hiwalay siya kesa sa isa lang siya. At pagka ganito yung scenario, mas mabilis yung collision, mas mabilis yung chemical reaction. So, balikan ko uli yung magnesium at saka yung hydrochloric acid. What if ang nilagay na strip dito of the magnesium ay malaki or mahaba compared sa maliliit or pira-piraso of the same length. So, let's say for example, mga 3 centimeters ng magnesium yung inilagay for the large strip. Sa small strip naman, 3 centimeters din, pero putol-putol. So, alin yung mas mabilis mag-produce ng product natin na magnesium chloride and hydrogen gas? Definitely, yung may mas malawak na surface area at yun yung second. So, yun naman yung in connection din with the particle size. Mas maliit yung size, mas expose yung substance o in all direction, mas mabilis ang chemical reaction. And the fourth factor is the presence of catalyst. So, ano muna yung catalyst? Catalyst ay isang substance na nagpapabilis ng chemical reaction pero hindi nito minimix yung sarili niya doon sa chemical reaction. So, parang gamitin, for example, ako yung catalyst. Gamitin ninyo ako but I will not be present in the product. So, magdi-dissipate din ako. So, hindi ako, makaka-apekto ako sa rate of chemical reaction, pero hindi ako makaka-apekto sa formation or my substances or what I have will not be present doon sa product na mabubuo. Yun. So, ano pa yung ginagawa ng catalyst? Naghahanap siya ng pathway para pababain yung activation energy. So, for example, yung hydroxide, this one, H2O2, will eventually decompose into water and oxygen. Oxygen gas. At low temperature. So, it will not happen or it will happen for a while. Pero kung gusto mo siyang pabilisin, lagyan mo siya ng substance na MnO2 or manganese oxide. The manganese oxide is located sa ibabaw ng arrow, pero hindi natin siya nakita doon sa product, sa right side. So, ano ibig sabihin yan? It served as a catalyst or pampabilis ng reaction. Pero after the chemical reaction, hindi naman siya nagmix doon sa products. So, in diagram, parang ganito siya. The actual activation energy required ay ganito kataas. So, if a catalyst is present, it will find a way or a pathway para pababain yung chemical or activation energy. So, it will look for a way para hindi mag-require ng mataas na activation energy but still form the product. So, concepts to remember: collision theory, chemical reaction, chemical equation, reactant, products, and of course, the factors. So, ito ay isang application ng catalyst in the on Earth. So, in some cases, maganda yung may catalyst ka kasi pinabibilis niya yung reaction. So, lesser yung energy na magagamit. Pero may mga example sa ating paligid na hindi maganda yung catalytic or catalyst. Like the breaking down of the ozone layer. So, itong chemical or substance na ito is called the chlorofluorocarbons. So, ang chlorofluorocarbons or CFCs are produced by ginagamit siya sa refrigerant, so ginagamit siya sa aircon, sa fridge, and nare-release siya. Pero sa level natin dito sa lower atmosphere, wala siyang harmful effect. So, unreactive siya dito. So, minsan, dinadala siya ng hangin sa mas mataas na bahagi ng atmosphere, specifically sa stratosphere, na kung saan nandun yung ozone layer. Ano bang function ng ozone layer? It blocks the ultraviolet rays coming from the sun para hindi tayo mabilis ma-sunburn or hindi mag-develop ng skin cancer ang mga tao. But then again, a certain form of light or electromagnetic spectrum or radiation, may certain wavelength siya that can react with CFC para tanggalin ang isang chlorine, gaya ng nangyari dito. So, natanggal si chlorine, and that's the start of a problem sa atmosphere, sa ozone layer. Kasi, chlorine will serve as a catalyst para i-break si ozone or O3, forming chlorine monoxide and oxygen molecule. So, nasira na yung ozone, forming the ozone layer. So, meron ka ngayong dalawang substances. Sa atmosphere, hindi lang naman ozone yung nandun. Meron pang other forms of oxygen like oxygen gas, kagaya nitong O2, and free oxygen atom. So, what will happen? This free oxygen atom will see chlorine monoxide. So, kumbaga parang, uy, oxygen. O, tara, ban tayo. So, sila yung nagsama, nahiwalay si chlorine. So, free na si chlorine. So, anong gagawin ni chlorine? hahanap uli siya ng ozone or O3 na sisirain. So, ganun yung cycle niya. Although, merong pahinga siya sa ating season or sa climate natin. Kasi pagka malamig yung panahon, this catalytic reaction is ceased. So, hindi siya nangyayari. Pero pagka summer or mataas ang temperature, may high amount or supply ng UVs, then this reaction will proceed. So, yan. So, ibig sabihin, kumbaga, sa isang buong taon, may bahagi ng taon na yung ozone layer ay butas, na butas, mayroong bahagi na halos naghihilom siya kasi hindi nagkakaroon ng destruction of the ozone layer. So, yun, isang application lang siya nung catalytic reaction or the concept about catalyst na pinapabilis niya yung chemical reaction. So, let us try to answer the questions here. So, self-check lang ito kung naintindihan nyo ibang concept sa lesson natin. Number 1, pause nyo, basahin, and then answer. So, write true if it's true. If it's false, modify the italicized word. So, for number 1, post nyo na lang and then I'll post the answer. Number 2, so the answer is number 3. The answer is number 4. The answer is, and number 5, this is the answer. So, thank you for your thank you for watching this discussion, and if gusto mo ulit panoorin, available lang naman ito sa channel natin, and for our next lesson, we'll tackle about limiting reactants and the amount of products formed. If you have some questions, feel free to message me or comment dito sa comment section. So, maraming salamat sa inyong lahat and magandang araw.